Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to episode 59 of LinkedIn live stream. Welcome back, Jason. Hope you're doing well.
I am, thanks. Thanks for having me back, and good morning to you.
Yeah, and good morning to you. So, we're going to jump into some more research, which is what we tend to do very, very often. And before we do, though, speaking of research, we're just going to do a quick shout out. Maybe later on, Jason will do a deeper dive on this. But 1 week ago, we actually had Gartner Magic Quadrant come out, or I guess actually technically it was 2 weeks ago, but it was last week when it was really starting to hit the various social platforms and whatnot. So just a quick shout out. If we bring up one graphic, we've got a Gartner Magic Quadrant update for you for 2021. This fun methodology has existed for 23 years. I have enjoyed and have the therapy bills to go along with all 23 years of its existence, one way or another. But Jason, be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to this and point out for the second year in a row, Veeam tops the ability to execute our y-axis.
Yeah, up and to the right, baby. Up and to the right. Certainly there's a lot of folks that, want to talk about the leader quadrant, but super excited to be recognized for ability to execute, man. That's super jazz. And now you've been a part of this for so long. Ability to execute. Break that down for us.
Yeah, ability to execute, and much like vision, is intended to actually be somewhat overweighted towards being historically reflective, meaning, you don't want to just make it about who has the best PowerPoint, although there is some element to, say what you're going to do, but it's also based heavily upon what have you done. And what have you done in the last handful of years, particularly the three-ish number of years? So things like vendor viability come into play, marketing and other kinds of capabilities or different criteria come in. And when you mentioned up and to the right, it's actually interesting. Of all the leaders, Veeam moved over to the right the most, meaning the x-axis or completeness of vision. And I always like to point out, it sounds like a vendor, just trying to make up a story. But last year, Veeam had our greatest release cadence in company history of new and updated products. And Jason, we haven't slowed that down in this year, have we?
We have not. It is almost hard to keep up with. What are we releasing this month? It's been an amazing cadence. But Dave, I got to tell you, every time that you talk about the Magic Quadrant, I learn something new. It would be remiss to not on this stream spend some time talking about where does this really come from. If you haven't already, download the report, because if you go look at the three things that Gartner said were our three biggest strengths, and then the three things of where Veeam has an opportunity to grow, I love both lists, frankly.
Yes.
I hope we spend some time on that sooner than later. If you'd like to hear more about Gartner Magic Quadrants in general and where Veeam's place is, make sure to pile on in the LinkedIn notes for that and in the comments, because we want to prioritize getting that into the queue.
Yeah, great point. And regardless of whether you're interested in Veeam or not, I would actually encourage you, click the link that we'll be placing in there, download a no charge copy of the report. Yeah, you have to give your contact information, but it's free research. And I just always encourage everyone, get informed, make the best decisions you possibly can. So with that out of the way, but still with research very much in mind, has been the case really all this year and going back into last year, Jason, take us through this topic that we're going to dive into today.
So today we're going to be talking about a little bit of data from the Cloud Protection Trends Report for 2021. And so this is a report that Veeam commissioned, a third-party analyst firm, and they went off and surveyed over 1,000 organizations. What was different about this particular research that we were really excited to learn about is they surveyed 6 different kinds of, let's call them cloudy personas. IaaS admins, PaaS admins, SaaS admins, container admin. I mean, they surveyed all these different personas and backup admins to try to understand, when you go production in a cloud, and there's more than one, right? What does that do? Why did you go there? What were your challenges in going there? And oh, by the way, how are you going to back it up? And so what we thought we'd share with the folks today, this is a preview. You can actually download this report in about a week. I think we're a couple days early on this particular live stream, but you can download the whole report. We picked one section which we thought was cool to share some on. Do we want to hit the map first and get people piling in while we kind of explore that data?
Yeah, and I'm probably remiss in not mentioning to everyone, if you're tuning in for the first time in a while, we do this global map. Give a shout out in the comments section where you're joining from, what country or what state that you might be participating from. Definitely love to hear all about that. We've got on the production team listed here in Colorado, Texas, and Georgia. We've also got some European presence, which is fantastic to see. Always appreciate that. And Jason, you made a great comment. We're actually giving a preview here prior to this report actually getting published. It's getting literally kind of polished up and will be available very soon. But we wanted to give a chance to talk through it. Just a few of the slides first. Let's go ahead and hit the first slide. And I like how you've organized this. Jason and the graphics team have done a lot of work to really put a lot of information into a short bit of space. Feel free to take screenshots of these, but also understand that literally within a couple weeks or less, this full report is going to be available for download.
Yeah, so this first one kind of sets us up, Dave. So the first one is and this actually comes out of the Data Protection Trends Report to set the landscape. So basically what we saw in our Data Protection Trends Report, that's the N of 3,000 enterprises around 28 different countries around the world, published at the beginning of 2020. What we looked at was, you see on the left, you see those physical servers, and between 2020 and the anticipated in 2023, you see a nice gradual anticipated decline, right? You have to look at the data in pairs. So you look 2020 to 2022, that's the green to yellowy green, and then 21 to 23, those are the two bluer greens per list. And basically what we see is these shifts of the percentage of servers that are physical within an overall IT strategy is going to gradually decline that's the left. In the middle, you see basically whatever is vert is mostly going to stay vert, right? 30 to 30 versus 23 to 24. And then the net sum gain is over on that right-hand side. The text on that right basically is a summary of what the chart shows, with the punchline of wherever your data is, whatever cloud it's in, it's still your data. Right? So you still got to back that up. And I think that kind of starts that conversation. Let's flip over to slide 2, because that's where we get into new data, right? So in slide 2, the two things that I thought were interesting were, how are you using the cloud and how long have you been in the cloud? Again, this is about looking at what does cloud production look like before we address the protection of it. Dave, you've seen some of this data as well, looking at the myriad ways they're using it and also cloud usage. What did you find interesting?
Yeah, that second one, high priority production workloads at 47%, that caught my eye. I mean, we've been talking about cloud as a target for backup and certainly as a secondary site for DR, disaster recovery, but normal production workloads being over half, but high priority production workloads being nearly half. That jumped out at me. How about you?
I just like the fact that high priority versus normal, the numbers weren't that different. I agree with you that it was cool to see how many high priority workloads are there. But the fact that there's only 8 points of difference between people that are putting high priority up versus normal basically says the cloud is not something they're trying. Right? They're in it. I mean, any workload that you could run on-prem is likely a candidate for cloud. And I thought that was interesting. And then what about longevity? We keep talking about the cloud like it's coming. That's not what the data says.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I mean, to your point exactly, even probably pre-pandemic, many organizations were further along on their journey than I think was sort of popularly held in contemporary opinion. But to your point, this data here just shows, especially the highest, they're saying more than 2 years, so that literally is pre-pandemic, that they have been doing a great deal of cloud activity. And we're not trying to suggest, I always like to make this point, Jason and I always make the point that the on-prem data center, for the vast majority of us, is not going away. Nope. However, it's not that cloud's coming, to your point, Jason. It's that cloud are largely already here and maybe even have expanded workloads and capabilities in the near future.
Yeah, and you know what we should probably do? We should probably make a note to drop in the chat. So if you pile in the chat and tell us where you're from, check back in a couple days in that chat thread because you'll see that we'll add the link to where you can download this report. So this slide is actually a pretty good example of what the report talks about. It's got quantitative data times 1,500 responses or up to. It's got an analysis in that upper right-hand corner, and then we did let the marketing guys chime in. So they were allowed to put their stuff in the little green box in that lower right hand corner. So you do get the Veeam perspective on what this data means in the green box, but the rest of this is empirical data and analyses. Dave, you mentioned that the data center ain't going away, right? And that next slide, I think, actually really makes your point because we looked at if you had a workload that is now in the cloud, where did it come from? And only 60%, 62% of the workloads that are now running in the cloud came from on-prem, right? Nearly half were just born in the cloud. I'm excited by that, but what's your rationale for that? Does that make sense?
It does to me because, I think we're seeing more organizations embrace development in the cloud and then go straight into production. There was a long held thesis, kind of similar to the early, or maybe it was 2008 and 9 timeframe. Oh, well, we'll develop in a virtualized environment and then we'll go into physical once we go in production. That thesis is not holding true. In fact, I would actually argue, Jason, love to get your read, that the migration towards embracing being born in the cloud, develop in the cloud, go to production in the cloud is happening faster than what we saw with on-premises server virtualization.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you get a lot of the same mentality that we had with virtualization, right? So when virtualization first came out, certainly a lot of folks were excited about, hey, I can get rid of those underutilized physical boxes. I can stand up VMs, right? And you can have that same enthusiasm for where the cloud will eventually go. But when we get down to it, when you think about how virtualization first rolled out, they didn't say, hey, we're going to stand up a new workload. So which physical box are we going to go turn off? Right? It wasn't a net sum gain. It was, I got to spin up a new workload. These VMs things work pretty good. I'll spin up another VM and another and another and another. Right? And now I think we're seeing in 2021, I got a new workload I got to spin up. This thing runs pretty well in Azure or Amazon or wherever. I'll spin it up and another and another and another. So it's not, migration's not the key use case. It's the agility to provision and then migrate when you can. I think that's how it's turning out.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that story about agility being really key or at the forefront of this. I think we've got some 14 or more countries that we've had responses from now. Let's take a quick look at the global map. Oh, indeed, we have always awesome, Jason, when some big geography like Canada in particular chimes in. We've got the Boston area, Atlanta area also coming in, but Toronto and a couple in Canada overall. That's always awesome to see. A lot more of Europe. We've got Italy, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, France, Belgium, Turkey, United Kingdom, also all chiming in. Argentina, one of your favorite places, Jason?
Yes, yes, yes. If you know how to do meat, I will come and visit you eventually, which also brings us right back to South Africa again. All my normal friends are online this morning, so good job.
Yep, we've got South Africa, Ghana, Tunisia, India as well. So awesome on that. Again, if you heard Jason just reiterate what he said, give a shout out where you're from, and we will drop into the chat a link to this report. Again, I always say get as much information as you can, especially if this is research that we ran that we're really wanting to share. Yeah, there's a little bit of a Veeam context to it, but as Jason pointed out, that is clearly identified. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see actually what people globally in different personas or roles had to say about their cloud usage. Also told Ohio came in. Good, always good to see. I was just there last week. First work trip in 503 days. What could go wrong?
Wow.
Botswana, I can't stop myself. We're going to have to move off the map because awesome country list that's happening. Jason, let's double click on the next slide now.
Yeah, so this is kind of this is the last slide, but I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on because the title of the report is around cloud protection trends, right? So the core goal of the research was first find out what drove you to the cloud, what are your drivers and benefits of the cloud, and there's a lot of great data around that. But then the punchline, because we are Veeam, is how are you going to back that up? Right. And so this again goes into personas. And I think there's two things that if folks take any screenshots at all before the whole PDF downloads, this is the one that I'd encourage you for. And that is we asked the research company asked the IaaS admins, the ones who are running cloud in production, and the backup admins the same questions. And then looking at where they agree and where they have some discrepancy, I think is probably even more illuminating the data itself. But basically there's two parts to the question. The top question, figure 1.5, says, how are you defining the strategy and the requirements for how data protection of cloud-based workloads should go? And then on the bottom, who's actually responsible for doing it, right? And not to say there's taxation without representation, but there is a little bit of disparity here between who's defining the strategy and who's actually doing the job. So, Dave, you as our enterprise strategist, you look at a lot of the big companies that are out there. Central IT's driving strategy more than backup. What do you think?
Yeah, my hope is that is a point in time enigma, that's not our final resting spot, that this is just a statement of how things have rolled out to this point. Although, if we go back to prior data, the cloud and usage of it is not new. Exploiting it for even high priority workloads is not new. But what I'd like to see happen over the next, hopefully short amount of time, less than a year and a half, would be basically what we saw with server virtualization, where this becomes less of an offshoot, incorporated more into the typical mainstream stakeholders that are responsible for that. To your point, Jason, you don't necessarily want to see decision making done by a group that is not part and parcel of actually implementing or responsible for upholding that decision. And I think we've seen that, Jason. I hear less and less about cloud centers of excellence and more about how the cloud is just becoming a part of the fabric of infrastructure and operations, of the app dev team, et cetera.
Yeah, I wonder if part of this isn't because, if you look even 10 years, 15 years back, the reason that you had a data protection team was because it required you to have a PhD in backup. Right? You had to have people whose full-time job was to become a specialist in backup. And, oh, by the way, they had to babysit the backup UI because jobs were failing and you had to restart and troubleshoot and audit, et cetera. I wonder if part of this might not be because as backup becomes more commoditizable in that, like, Veeam, you don't need 3 weeks of training in order to be successful with backing up a workload on or off prem, right? We spit out reports that'll tell you how it goes every day. I mean, when you do things like that and things like assured backup and ensure replica, when you start doing things like that, maybe you don't need a backup expert to drive this. And so same way as virtualization, you don't see many vAdmins these days. It's just, to your point, it's just part of the fabric. And so I wonder if backup is becoming more accessible as companies like Veeam are driving ease of use and ease of management.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that the ability to achieve proper data availability, backup, DR, is greater than what we've experienced in the past. We'd always like to think that we're getting some institutional learning along the way, and maybe some of our past lessons that we learned when we first went to server virtualization on-prem, and then some of us took server virtualization and went to the cloud with it.
Sure.
Obviously, if you're further ahead on that curve, our colleague Michael Cade, who is dealing in the containers world, Kubernetes, and specifically, is certainly seeing a lot of this activity as well. What I like, though, is that I think things are happening faster than what we saw in the past.
Yeah. And again, I'll go back to kind of like some of the other data that we saw earlier. What I like is the fact that when we ask the questions of two groups, the two groups agree.
Yes.
Right. So it wasn't that long ago, Veeam made its first $1 billion based on supplementing whatever other cruddy physical backup solution you're already using, right? So you had the vAdmins using Veeam, and then you had the generic IT pros using whatever they were already using in the data center. And so I love the fact that this data kind of shows there's good alignment, that the IaaS admins and the backup admins agree. Now, it may not be what we think is the right recipe, but they both agree this is the recipe. And that is that the central IT team is defining strategy. The people that do backups are doing all the backups, right? I love that they agree. Because when you don't agree, that's when you get either overprotection, they're both trying to do it, or underprotection, each of them thought the other one was doing it. So yes. I love the fact they agree.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that bottom on the figure 1.6, the bottom response area, we do not back up data from the cloud. Relatively low numbers for where we're at in the life cycle. I'm very encouraged to see that. I think people are understanding if it's important, it needs to be protected. And protection doesn't mean just trust your hyperscaler. It means make sure you have the same kind of capabilities as you did if you deployed this on-prem.
That's right. And for the same reasons, right? If you have 7 years of data retention requirements, you still have 7 years of data retention requirements, even if you're running on somebody else's metal, right? So all those things of ransomware preparedness, regulatory mandates, governance and compliance, that all still applies, right? You're just using somebody else's metal. So.
Absolutely. It's still your data, right? We say that with SaaS applications like Office 365, now Microsoft 365, it's still your data. You're still responsible for it.
Now, as a tease, I should point out that all three of these slides, if you look on the top of that slide, that little white tab that you see, all three of these slides actually, or pages, came out of the IaaS in production. So this is the hosting section of this report. In a couple days, when the rest of the report comes out, you'll be able to see how IaaS was used for disaster recovery. That's its own section. Dave, to your point, software as a service, those perspectives are a little different than IaaS. So that's an interesting section. And then, we can't give enough shouts out to Michael Cade and what he's doing on thought leadership for containers and also the protection of containers. It also has its own section as well. So hopefully a lot of folks will download the report. There's some great data, some great analyses, and the Veeam marketers got to put a little something in the green box too. So we hope you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to our colleague, Julie Webb, who's been absolutely vital in all of this research that we've done. And if you've been watching any of this over certainly this calendar year, we've got over half a dozen research projects nearly completed or actively in flight right now. We've doing a lot and sharing a lot by design. We want to give back to the community. We want to be able to offer our take on what's happening, but also have an unbiased view of what's happening. Frankly, we use this internally from a product management perspective, but we also think that it has real value from an engagement perspective in the community. So we can share this information so we can collectively see what's going on. It's not because you may learn something that you had no idea what's happening, but you can use this as air cover to take to your organization, to take to your boss, to say, look, I'm not an outlier here. This is actually happening. Cloud is accelerating faster than many of us even thought.
Yeah, can't say enough. This particular data we talked about really was about personas as much as anything, right? So, at Veeam, we have a long relationship with virtualization admins, with the on-prem data center architects, CXOs, the people that manage that space. But a big part of a lot of this research was really to help make sure that we understand what are we supposed to be building. Right. Yes. And how do we meet the needs of those secondary personas? And so a lot of this persona work, candidly, was to help Veeam understand, if you're an IaaS admin, if you're a SaaS admin, what matters to you, right? What are your challenges? What are your concerns? What are your goals? To make sure, are we building the right stuff for you? And so this was such an enlightening project for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's hit the map one more time because I just wanted to double check it. We do have Tajikistan in the house, actually the capital of that wonderful country. That capital, Dushanbe, is sister cities with where I live in Boulder, Colorado. One of my favorite places here is the Dushanbe Tea House. They have over 300 kinds of tea, believe it or not, Jason. I just finished drinking some Earl Grey from there, but great to see all the different people and places coming in. Want to give a shout out to everyone for viewing. We always appreciate that. We are going on now, as we said, almost 60 episodes over about a year and almost a year and a half now. So kind of amazing. As we begin to look ahead a little bit, Jason, we've got our colleagues. We were speaking about some of the interesting new technologies. Well, we're going to bring in a partner. And so this Friday, we're going to have Dan Box from Data Dynamics join in with our very own Rick Vanover, and on our team as well, Aaron Murphy. I believe Aaron's going to be making his debut on LinkedIn live stream platform on Friday. But Rick, Aaron, and Dan from Data Dynamics are going to talk about the very interesting things that Veeam Plus Data Dynamics can do at the same time together. Mexico also came in the house. Definitely want to make sure we take care of that wonderful country. I'm a little further from them than I used to be, but they're still very close to our hearts. Jason, you're holding down the fort nearby.
I share a river boundary with them, so we're all good down here.
There you go. And one last shout out to the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Definitely encourage you, download that link. I think Jason and I actually will do a little bit of a deep dive, double click on this later on. Here's the type of information you have to fill out, but you can get the entire report. I can't remember the latest going price, Jason, but I don't think I'm too far off if I said it's over $4,000 to go buy if you weren't already a Gartner client. Yeah. You can download it for free for many years. I think it's the last 4 years, maybe it's even 5 or 6 years. Veeam has actually facilitated tens of thousands of downloads off of this report from our website.
Yeah, and again, all we're doing is we're providing we've paid your fee so that you can download this report, and it has the exact same breakdown on Veeam and everyone else who wants to become Veeam, all within the same report. So take a look at the pros, the cons, the placement on the chart, and yeah, I hope we kind of get nerdy on it because I always learn from you when we do. So.
Definitely looking forward to that discussion. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we will see you next time on episode 6060. Thanks, Jason. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, y'all.